it should work, yes.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so although I'm critical, as Margaret said, I like to think I'm being constructive at the same time, okay? So I'm not just anti. I'm trying to disambiguate things. And the way I think of it is the little guy down there, it represents me, and the big army and everything represents these rather large, well-funded organizations. So sometimes I might sound a bit more negative than perhaps I am, but the reason is I have to shout loud to counter some of the conversations coming from these other people. So what I'm going to talk about is AI and education rather than just AI in education, because I think it's a broader topic that's pretty important. And the reason I'm talking about both is because the connections between these topics are actually relatively complex, and I like to make things as simple as I can. So for me, I think about it in terms of two buckets. So the first bucket is teaching and learning with AI, so what we've been calling AI in education. But the other bucket that often gets forgotten is teaching and learning about AI. And you'll remember, maybe some of you, that I asked a question yesterday about what we mean by AI literacy, and so this is my second bucket, which is why I think it's really quite important. So talk about teaching and learning with AI first of all, and I further subdivide this, not alone in doing this, into three groups. So student-focused AI-Ed, teacher-focused AI-Ed, and institution-focused AI-Ed. And the point is that all of these exist, but they overlap. So it's just a convenience to categorize them like this. You can always move things around if you really want to. But nevertheless, I find that categories are often quite useful for trying to analyze things. So look at institution focus first of all, and there's these kind of types of AI-Ed. And so I've just named 5 different types here. But admissions, AI is being used for student selection in universities around the world, course planning, scheduling, timetabling, lots of tools about that, school security, and so on. Now, what's interesting about the institution-focused AI-Ed is that's actually received the least focus by researchers and funders. But I think it's a bit like the Californian gold rush, where the people out there digging for gold, and it was the people who were digging for gold who actually didn't make the money. The people who made the money were the people in the back, people running the restaurants and the horses and the equipment. So it's the back-end people. And I think this might become far more important in the future, but at the moment, it's received relatively little. But this lot has received by far the greatest attention. And what I haven't said is that the AI-Ed community, for many of you might not realize this, but the AI-Ed community have been around for at least 45 years. Right? This is not a new thing. Generative AI arrived, 2 years ago, but the AI-Ed community has been researching for almost 50 years. And all these different types here, right? These are all different applications, different approaches to the use of AI in education. So I had the 5 on the previous one, had this list, and we've got another list to go. But you'll note that in the middle here, one of them is generative AI, right? I have something like 26 different categories here. So when we talk about AI in education, while generative AI has suddenly exploded, it's not the only thing. And when we think about AI, we need to think more broadly than that. Generative AI is obviously the flavour of the moment, and I was mentioning it earlier, I feel like a surfer on a big wave, and I'm surfing it, trying to keep my head above water, but fearful I'm going to crash any moment. So it's interesting, it's important, but it's not the only thing. And then we have teacher focus, another bunch of different things. And many of these are still quite speculative, some of them a little bit worrisome. But anyway, a huge range of different applications, different types of AI applied in education. So to a less informed audience, I often give lots of examples of these, but I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to move straight on to, let's break this apart. Let's take a critical approach. So I'm just going to pick up on some ideas here, the kind of things that are often said about these tools, and my take on that. So the first one is the idea that these tools will save teacher time. Now, technology to save teacher time has been around a long time. It's been around since the 1930s, with at least a beginning. The psychologist B.F. Skinner developed his first teaching machine, and one of the selling points of his teaching machine was it would save teacher time. It's a very reasonable thing. We want to save teachers' time. That's very reasonable. Skinner's teaching machine did not save teacher time. And no edtech since the 1930s to today have ever saved teacher time. And no AI-ed tool, in my opinion, saves teacher time. What it can do is displace teacher time from one set of activities to another set of activities. So with generative AI, maybe, and I'm not convinced, but maybe it can help a teacher develop a teaching plan. But how many prompts do they have to write before they get the teaching plan they want? How much editing do they need to do of the teaching plan before they get the teaching plan that's appropriate for them and their students and their curriculum? So it doesn't save them time, it displaces time. Another claim, I forgot this bit, sorry. The point is, if it does save teacher time, which it doesn't, if it did, then doesn't it mean we're just going to get rid of a few teachers? And you're going to say, no, 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 no. The use of AI in education is not about getting rid of teachers. Well, I'm sorry, yes it is. This is a school, this was announced back in November last year. A school in Texas has no teachers because they don't need teachers anymore. They have an AI-ed system, and the students in the morning, they use an AI-ed tool, and in the afternoon they work with guides, not teachers, so underpaid, underqualified, undersupported adults who don't have the status of a teacher because they don't need teachers. So we need to be very careful about these things. These are not mythological. These are things that are actually happening in our world. The other claim of the AI-ed tools is that they personalize the learning, and I heard the word personalization several times yesterday. And Caroline and I, we've been talking about this for a long time now, and we get very confused about why people get excited. I mean, there are two main problems with personalization. First, or three actually. First, we're not even convinced that personalization of learning is a good thing. Where's the evidence that tells us that personalization in learning is a good thing? What happened to collaboration in learning? Students working together to discover and develop and discuss things together. So we're not sure it's a good thing, but even if it is a good thing, we're not sure that it's even possible to do with the technologies. So as this diagram tries to illustrate, what we have are personalized pathways through the materials, but it takes everybody to the same output, to the same endpoint. Now, for me, that's not personalization. If it was genuinely personalization, it's about helping each individual student become the best that they personally can become. But these EdTech tools that claim personalization, they're not about that. They're about getting everybody into that same box, passing those same exams. So it's not true personalization, even if personalization is a good thing. As I say, it gets rid of collaboration and the social interaction elements of teaching and learning, which most of us believe is fundamentally important to education. One of the key reasons we bring students together into a school environment is so they can learn together and work together, so that students can learn what it means to work with other people. The reason we're in a room today is because we're working together. Another problem with these tools is they do, whether we like it or not, they do tend to disempower teachers. And the reason they do that is because they take decision-making away from teachers. And one of the ways they do that is because they make decisions about what the student does next based on some internal algorithm that the system has, based on the decisions made by the developers. But actually, it's not transparent. So no teacher knows why the system has suggested this. So that the machine is making these decisions and the teachers become disempowered. It also means this, the commercialization of education by stealth, because there are a huge number of edtech companies, and I was hearing yesterday about the edtech community here in Estonia. There are lots of companies out there. Now, I have I'm not disagreeing, so I completely understand that mostly they're out there because they want to use their skills to help people learn. I get that. I'm not criticizing that. But education has been known as a common good, and most societies around the world, education is organized to support and is funded by the state so that students get a fair chance to move forward and develop themselves. But with these tools, we're shifting that rhetoric, we're shifting that narrative to the side. Not only that, we don't even know what the impact of these tools are on the students involved. Now, the reason for the picture on the left is because, those of us, and I'm sure lots of you, including me, will use our sat-nav to find our way around a new city or whatever to get to a new town. But there's evidence already that those of us who rely upon sat-nav have lower spatial awareness. So there is a negative impact of these tools on our brains. Now, it's not major, I'm not arguing that, but it is there, it has been shown. I'm not saying it's the same when we use AI&ED tools on children. I'm saying we do not know because we haven't done that research. So there might be a negative impact, there might be a positive impact, but we don't know. One of the things that we've heard about is the notion of emotion detection. And I personally have a problem with this for two reasons, but I'm only going to mention one at this point. And the main reason is that it doesn't work. I'm sorry, I've heard people saying it does work. I've heard lots of different examples of people arguing it does work. But the reality is it really doesn't. And yeah, my second reason I'm going to come back to later. This you might have recognized, might have seen this before, and it's the use of AI enabled monitoring systems in classrooms. Now, you're all thinking, some of you might be from China, I don't know, I know some are from Taiwan, obviously you might be thinking, well, this is China. China do things like this. Well, A, this is an American technology. B, it's being used across the US, it's being used in places like the UK, so it's not just a Chinese problem. And B, China stopped this happening a few years ago. It's creeping back in now, from people who tell me, but nevertheless, but this idea that these tools can monitor what students are doing. Are they concentrating? Are they focusing? Again, it's a mythological technology. It doesn't really work. But even if it did, it's still hugely problematic, in my opinion. One of the ways in which AI really came to the fore was during the pandemic, right? Because students could no longer go to the universities to do their examinations. That's fine, we do them online. But we have to make sure they're not cheating. And the way we ensure not cheating is by using these wonderful systems. But these wonderful systems are hugely problematic. Firstly, they tend not to work. Second, they undermine lots of students' mental health. Third, they discriminate between different faces and colours of skin. Most importantly, you can get around them. Any student worth their salt can spend 5 minutes on the internet and work a cheat to get around these systems. They don't even do what they claim to do. But they were hugely popular. They became huge companies and were given lots and lots of money by governments. Hugely worrying. And we need to rethink, what would we mean by cheating? Why are we doing this? Why? We need to rethink these kind of approaches. Okay, now all the stuff I've just told you, you might dismiss. Say, well, that's just Wayne exaggerating, talking nonsense, and it's an opinion, Wayne's opinion, but I'd have a different opinion. Well, this one you can't have a different opinion on, because this is a statement of fact. Today, there are no independent evaluations at scale for the effectiveness of the tools I've shown you, for their safety, or for the impact, positive impact on classroom ecosystems. The information, the evidence just isn't there. There are thousands upon thousands of little studies, but those studies are conducted by the developers of the tool, so they obviously want to show that their tool works. But independent, no. At scale, no. And not only that, we don't even know what we mean by the word effective. We can debate, we could have a whole conference about the concept of effectiveness in education technology, because we don't tend to agree. Okay, so that was the general kind of questions. Normally, when I do these kind of talks, if I have more time, I then talk a lot about the ethics of AI in education, and we all know that ethics is important. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I'm just going to pick up a few quick things. And the first thing to pick up is that in the West, the history of ethics in philosophy is divided into three narratives. One is called virtue ethics, traced back to the Greek philosopher Aristotle. But the two I'm going to talk about are first, consequentialism, often known, or a type of consequentialism known as utilitarianism. And the idea is that the greatest good for the greatest people. So something is ethical if it achieves the greatest good for the greatest number of people. I'm exaggerating, but you get the drift. This is the logic that's used by most ed tech and AI and ed developers. They work out, how do we gets the greatest good for the greatest number of students. But utilitarianism is problematic for many, many reasons. Now, I'm not going to start a debate on which is better, which is stronger, but I'm going to go on to the third, which is deontology, which is a lovely name that I always get confused about. But anyway, this is Immanuel Kant, and he, one of the many things he did was describe this approach to ethics that's known as deontology. And deontology is about starting with rights of people. So an ethical thing is something that does not undermine the rights of people. And all of us, as human beings in the world, we have rights. We have rights to be. We have human rights. So, as it says here, the basic rights and freedoms belong to every person, right? We all share these in the world from birth until death, regardless of where you're from, what you believe, how you choose to live your life, and they can never be taken away. Now, I'm not arguing that this is better than the other approach, but what I'm saying is that these human rights have been agreed by the world, 200 countries, United Nations, in 1948. So we can debate and discuss and argue about what's good or bad about them, but nevertheless, it's something we can fixate on, we can use. But not only human rights, curiously, it wasn't until 1978, I think it was, they came up with child rights. And the recognition that children, and we work with children when we're talking about AI&ED a lot, and the point with children is they have extra rights. And the reason they have extra rights is because they are not as cognitively developed as we are, as adults. And so therefore we need to give them extra rights. So here are the extra rights that are often given to them. So the right to dignity, to autonomy, to be heard, to not suffer from discrimination, to privacy, including private thoughts, and to be protected from economic exploitation. So these were agreed by over 200 countries around the world in 1974, 8, I can't remember, but anyway, in the 1970s somewhere. And my point is that unintentionally, these child rights are being undermined by a lot of the ed tech that we see. So the right to autonomy. Well, when a child sits down in front of one of these tools, they have no choice. The tool tells them, you've done this, now do this. The child has very little choice. To privacy, including private thoughts. Or remember the emotion detection? Well, surely your emotions are your private thoughts. But here, this is a human right. But those tools that are claiming to detect the emotions of the student, even with the best intentions, are undermining child rights. And the final one there, to be protected from economic exploitation. The point is, with all of the EdTech and AI-ed tools that are being put into classrooms, particularly by the commercial sector, they extract data, right? Data is drawn out of the classroom and is used by the company to improve their tool so they can support more children, so they can sell to more schools, more governments. So in other words, the children are sat there interacting with the tools, and the companies are making money out of the children's interaction. So the children, you could argue, and I would argue, are working as unpaid labour, and the companies are making profits based on what those children are doing. So I can't see it any other way than the children are being economically exploited. We need to be really careful about these things. Okay, so I'm not going to talk anymore about ethics. I could talk about it on and on and on because I think it's so important. But we've looked about teaching and learning with AI, so now we're going to look about teaching and learning about AI, so AI literacy. Now, when I asked a question yesterday about what are the top things that you might have in an AI literacy, what are the kind of things that might be involved in that? I would argue that everything I was told fitted this, the technological dimension. It was, how does it work? How do we create it? Writing prompts. How do we use it? Yeah, it was very much about that. And for me, I'm sorry, that's at best half of what we need AI literacy to be. AI literacy should not just be about the technology. It also fundamentally, in my opinion, needs to be about the human dimension of AI. So what does that mean? What kind of things are we talking about? Well, let's have a look at that. So a metaphor for you. When we are learning to drive a car or using a car, we need to understand how the car works. We need to know if we don't put gas or petrol in, it's not going to go anywhere. We need to know what that big wheel does and what the pedals do. If we don't know that, we can't use a car. Agreed? But we also need to know this stuff. We can't go out on the road if we don't understand that our car is a lethal weapon, and if we don't take care of other road users and the rules of the road and the other things that we come across when we're driving, then we don't really understand driving at all. And we would never allow somebody who knows how to turn the wheel and put the gas in to go out on the road if they don't know this stuff, because we know they might kill people. So we don't allow that. So let's think about AI. So just as we need to understand how the AI, how the car works, we also need to have an idea about AI, just the notion that AI is everywhere. And it was mentioned yesterday, we need everybody to understand what is AI and what is not AI. I love that notion, but actually if we had just computer scientists in a room who've been developing AI for a long time, they would disagree about what is AI and what's not AI. So that's even itself quite a complex subject. But we need to have some ideas. And in particular, we need to understand how Gen AI works. And one of the examples of Gen AI that our colleague gave yesterday about how it works, I thought was really clear. And that's the kind of thing that we need people to understand, the fact that Gen AI is just adding words in a list. But we also need to think about the safety. So we need to think about what are the ways in which AI is impacting on people, on humans, on all of us as citizens of our countries, on educators, on students, everyone. We need to have an understanding of this. And for me, without bringing these two together, we're not doing it right. So the way I think about it, though, is this, because often what happens is there are lots of courses out there online where you can learn and become AI literate, but they all focus on the technological dimension. If they cover the human dimension, what that means is they talk about ethics. But on an hour's course, they do 55 minutes on how to use AI and how to create it, and they do 5 minutes on ethics, and by ethics, they only mean bias. They don't really look at what ethics is or the complexities of it. So instead of separating it like that, I think it needs to be done like this. So we've got a technological dimension, we've got a human dimension, but we need to intertwine them. So when we're talking about something like facial recognition, we shouldn't just be talking about the technology, we should be talking about the human impact of facial recognition technology. What does it mean to people, to us? These things are really important, so making sure that we interweave these kind of ideas. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to focus on the kind of issues that I think we should be talking about. Now, this is not fully comprehensive, but I'm just trying to give you some of the things that I think are worth considering. This is a bit of interaction now, so I need to check that you're all awake. What do you see? Great. And in fact, the AI system also recognized it as a panda, which is pretty cool, and it was quite confident. Now, I admit this is a couple of years old, but anyway, it's kind of interesting. So what happens when we mix the picture of the panda with this visual noise? Well, we end up with this. Now, humans in the room, what do you see? Lovely, well done. And now, the AI is even more confident, which is fantastic, right? It's confident as a gibbon. So AI is pretty brittle at times. Here's another one. This is more recent. So AI being used to reconstruct faces from poor images, right? So who's this? I think that's kind of fair as humans, but no, you're wrong. The AI says it's this person. Notice any difference here between these two characters? Yes. Right? Quite a fundamental difference. And this one might be even more closer to home. So this young woman decided that she wanted to put her image onto LinkedIn to get a new job, right? Very reasonable. And she wanted to use an AI system to enhance her image, to make it look more professional. And that's what she put in the prompt, make this image more professional. And so it did that for her. It did this. Now, I think that's hugely problematic. But this is the way these systems are currently working. They get hidden. One of the things we say about AI, or people assume about AI, is it kind of works independently of humans. You know, the system does it, the AI does it. It's nonsense. Without humans, the AI does nothing. So human sets the objectives, works out what the system's going to do, chooses and cleans the data, labels the data. This is a picture from Kenya. And this young woman, the other woman, what they're doing is they are looking at images taken by videos on cars in San Francisco. And they look at every frame of the video, every frame, 25 frames a second, and they array it. There's a car, there's a person, there's a car. Next frame, there's the car, there's the person, there's the car. Next frame, there's the car, there's the person. And that is their job. And they're not paid very much. But without these people, they're known as the ghost workers of AI. Without the ghost workers of AI, AI wouldn't work at all. None of the systems that you've engaged with would work at all. But also a human designs the network, a human trains the network, a human creates the outputs, and importantly, humans in big companies, big commercial organizations are in full control. So when an AI system generates something or says something or predicts something, don't think it's just a neutral computer doing stuff. Think about the people behind it, particularly the people in the big commercial organizations who've made choices. And that's why these systems generate what they do. During the pandemic, we were told this is going to be AI's moment. AI is going to come to the level, it's going to find these things, it's going to find ways to diagnose COVID, ways to address COVID, to vaccinate it. And as it says here, 2,000 studies. Not one of them was of any clinical use. And this is one meta-analysis from 2021, but there are several others that say very similar things. So, even at that big juncture in humanity, the COVID pandemic, it didn't help us much. Anybody recognize where this country might represent? Okay. The reason it's here is because it is today already AI systems, the energy used by AI systems, use as much energy as a country the size of the Netherlands today. It's predicted within just a year, it will be using as much energy as India, which has overtaken China to become the most populous country in the world. So AI is not a free lunch, it's using massive amounts of energy. It's also using up thousands of gallons, millions of gallons of water. So Microsoft server stations, they use something like 25,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of water just to cool down their servers, their computers. Now this is water that cannot be reused for drinking or for agriculture. It's just used up, it's dirty, it can't be used. So again, water is being used by these systems. And we as humans are not getting access to that water any longer. But also, the training ChatGPT-3 used as much, emitted as much carbon dioxide as driving a car from here to the moon and back. So AI is not a free lunch. It's having massive impacts on climate. And one of the things that people keep telling us is that AI is helping us address climate change. But they often forget to point out that the very AI that's helping to address climate change is part of the problem, a massive and increasingly large part of the problem. One of the other problems is that we're losing control of our own stuff. And actually we're handing over responsibility without thinking about it to these massive corporations. These massive corporations, some in the US, some in China, a few in Europe, and not many at all. And we're handing over then, we have no democratic control over these companies at all. And some of them have more money than a country the size of Estonia, for example. Right? They're very, very powerful organizations, and we're just handing over this control with no democratic intervention. One of the things we often hear people say is AI's not magic, right? AI's not magic. Now, I agree that AI is not magic in the sense that Harry Potter is magic. Of course, that's real magic. But from my opinion, AI is like stage magic. It looks incredible. It looks believable. But we know it's a trick. We don't know how the trick's done, but we know it's a trick. We know that this woman is not really floating. But we can't work out how it happens. That's how I want you to think of AI. So AI looks like it's floating, but it's really a trick. I love this. I'll leave you to read this. So when we were told that AI was going to come along, it's going to make our lives better. It's going to look after our laundry, our dishes, our food, our work, cleaning dirty toilets, all that kind of stuff. Allow us the free time so we can be creative. We can write poetry and songs and paint paintings. And what's happening? Well, that's what the generative AI systems are claiming to be able to do. So they can do the art and the writing to give us more time so we can clean more toilets. This is not what we were told was going to happen at all. Now, this one, I put this together just a few days ago, and I promise you I worked really hard. I wrote so many prompts. I used 6 generative AI image creating systems. And all I asked it was a centaur, so a horse's body and a human head, right? So I just said an image of a centaur. It couldn't do it. Okay, an image of a centaur with a human head and a horse's body. It would do horses with humans sat on top of them. I went around and around and around in circles. I couldn't get it. So this was the best I could come up with. So this is a very, strong, trusty horse. I know it doesn't look like that, but anyway. But the idea was we're talking about AI augmenting us as humans. So we have the power of the AI, but we're in control. The irony is that this is the reality. Right? The reality is we're doing all the grunt work, and it's the horse that's in the head of the horse that's in control. Okay, moving on then to generative AI, which is a big part of this conference these 2 days. So I want to think about this a bit more. So I've given you an example of a place where I had a problem. You'll recognise this, of course. Right? You've all used this. It's great fun, isn't it? And wasn't it amazing the first time you used it? Didn't you? I can't believe it's achieving this. I mean, it still does that to me every time I use it, because it is amazing, in my opinion. But, and there's a huge but. Firstly, ChatGPT is only one of them. Right? There are many others. I made this slide a year ago. If I put on all the companies I've seen since then, you wouldn't be able to see the slide. So there's so many organizations out there now that are offering variants of the tools, and also tools built on top of tools. So even if you use that tool, you don't even know what that tool's doing. So, the transparency and privacy and those other issues that's so important, we can't trace. It makes it even harder for us. Did some of you see this image? So this image was one of the first generative AI images ever to make the news. And it won a painting competition in a small US town. But the reason I show it is because what people don't realize is the person didn't write a prompt, press and say, oh, there's my image. This person spent weeks upon weeks upon weeks writing prompt upon prompt upon prompt upon prompt until they finally ended up with this image. The second thing I use this image is because, for me, this type of image, and I have to be careful how I say this, so don't take this the wrong way, but this is a teenage boy's wet dream. This is what these images are all about. And we need to think about that, where they're coming from. But this, as was mentioned yesterday, is how AI works. So here's the question, which was the first elephant to swim across the English Channel? So it says, I predict the best first word is the. First, because it's from the prompt. Elephant, that's from the prompt. To swim across. So it's just predicting the most obvious next word. And off it goes. There's an elephant called Cammy. That's amazing, right? Well, no elephant has ever swum across the English Channel. It's complete nonsense what's been generated here. It's amazing, but it's nonsense. I love this kind of thing. So look at that. Draw me a kitchen with absolutely no polar bear in it. Now, fair enough, this picture is from a few months ago. But just before I came out today, I noticed a tweet with an image. And it's this. Look at the date, 14th of August, 2024. Okay, so this was yesterday. It was yesterday, wasn't it? Well, anyway. this is the problem. Now, what's so difficult about it? How do I need to train a student to write a prompt that's not going to come up with this kind of nonsense? Very interesting, in my opinion. Of course, it's not just OpenAI, it's Google as well, with Gemini. And one of the problems we know from the early pictures and the early texts is they were racist, they were sexist, they were nasty in lots of different ways. And so Google made damn sure that didn't happen when they launched Gemini. And so we got this. So a 1943 German soldier. Well, there weren't many black German soldiers in 1943. There certainly weren't many Chinese women German soldiers in 1943. It just makes no sense. But they've tried so hard to be okay, to be ethical, not to be racist, that it's gone completely opposite direction. And of course, you've seen some of these things. Whoops, go back to that. Okay, but it's a video, and it plays, and it's quite amazing. But at the last part of the video is a cat on a bed. And the cat is, pawing and playing with the lady who's in the bed. And what's interesting, if you count the legs on the cat, there's actually 5 legs, which is kind of weird, because we know that cats tend not to have 5 legs, but the system apparently doesn't know that. The other thing we're told about these systems is that they are creative, right? They're creative, come up with ideas that have never been thought of before. They're creative, it's wonderful. So here's a question. My cheese is not sticking to the pizza. What do I do about it? Here's some things you can try. So one of the things we can try is you can add about 1/8 of a cup of non-toxic glue. So the glue will keep the cheese on the pizza. That's perfect, right? Right. I mean, that's a creative example. So the AI has managed to make something completely creative, never before thought of. Nonsense. This is Mr. Smith, 11 years ago. I recommend mixing about 1/8 of a cup of Elmer's glue in with the sauce. So it's not creative, it just appears creative because it's found something very, very, very tiny in its data set, and that's what it's using, that's what it's exploiting. If you spend just a few minutes on the internet, you're going to come up with thousands of pages that's showing how generative AI can be used in education. Thousands, right? And we've heard some at this conference as well. But there are problems with that lot as well. So I'm going to use just one example that I think is problematic. And this is notion of using a generative AI tool to summarize things. So, I'm an academic, I read a lot of PDFs. But of course I don't want to. I'd much rather the generative AI does it for me and just gives me the highlights. But there's a problem with that. So this is a report I wrote, so you're very welcome to get this. And one of the things I talk about is intelligence. And so, a few paragraphs here. So I put it into one of the tools, and I asked it to summarize the text. And I gave it that text I just showed you. And very quickly it came up with this. Oh, that's impressive. So then I put in the second prompt, which was this. Just repeat. And it came up with this. And this, and this, and this. Now, you read each one of these, the summary is different. But the first one looked great. So it's only when you're an arrogant person like me, a critical researcher, that you might think to push it again. But most people don't. They'll take the first version and think, oh, that looks pretty definitive, that's impressive. There's my summary. I'll read the summary. I now know the paper. But this little experiment, for me, indicated that's not true. You don't get the summary, which is what it looks like. You get a summary, one potential summary of many possible summaries. The key thing, it's not the summary that you would have got if you had done the summarizing. In summary here, I'm now going to say, ChatGPT doesn't summarize. The point is when you ask ChatGPT to summarize the text, instead shortens the text. So it identifies the words that it thinks are superfluous and removes those words. But to summarize, you need to understand. You need to see how arguments develop. You can't just remove words. This picture for me sums up generative AI. the distinction between the reality and the appearance. The way I think about this is that ChatGPT, it looks human-like, its output, right? You agree? It looks human-like. That's what everybody says, it's human-like. But it isn't. It looks accurate, but it really isn't. It looks definitive, agree? But it isn't. It looks intelligent, but it isn't. And it looks like it understands, but it doesn't. Now, you are all academics and you're all sharp people, so when you get the output of generative AI, you know this stuff and you address it accordingly. But our students and many of our colleagues don't. Many of our colleagues think it's human, accurate, definitive, intelligent, and understands. And hopefully I've shown you that it's not. This is how I kind of summarize this. Imagine this picture represents the complexity of the world, right? It's obviously a very tiny slice of the complexity of the world. But this is what generative AI does. It takes that complexity and it essentially averages it all out to make this bleh color, right? That's what it ends up with. It just averages out. And it means if it's not a standardized opinion, then that opinion gets lost in the translation. It's just shoved to the side. So a country, this was mentioned yesterday, a country like Estonia with its own language, if it is not careful, that language can get shunted out because it's not part of the dominant way of thinking. And the metaphor I often give is smoking. Now, we know today in 2024 that smoking is not good for us. Back in the 1950s, the opinion was that smoking was good for us, and doctors recommended, oh, you're feeling stressed, smoke. And if you'd had ChatGPT back in the 1950s, it would be saying incredibly confidently, smoking is good for you, because that was the standardized opinion. So it's not just the opinions at the edges, it's also innovation can also get shunted out of ChatGPT and other LLMs, etc. But importantly, it can increase the marginalization of those marginalized voices. The other problem is that these tools were launched without any safety checks whatsoever. They just launched them and we were left to sort out whether they were safe or not. And of course, they were entirely dependent on the ghost workers that I mentioned earlier. And there are lots of ghost workers in Kenya who suffered mental health issues, marital breakdowns, because of the disgusting materials that the early version of ChatGPT, before it was launched to us, the public, but the people, humans in Kenya, that had to look at all that garbage. I think when we talk about AI literacy, teachers in particular need to know this stuff. If they then choose to use it in any way, that's up to them. But not knowing this stuff means they're working in a fog, they're working blindly. Okay, so this is, I'm coming pretty much to a close now, but this is a new part to my presentation. So even Caroline, who's had the honor of hearing me speak several times, hasn't seen this, and so she's going to tell me later whether it works or not. But anyway, weasel words. So weasel words, it says they're words or phrases using vague claims to appear meaningful, but they're not really that meaningful. Now, these are words we hear all the time in discussions about AI, and particularly AI in education. So, my first weasel word is the word potential. How many times have you seen AI has potential to enhance learning? AI has potential to save teacher time. AI, what does potential mean? A stick has potential. I'm not interested in potential unless that potential, I've got some evidence for it. So if you ever see the word potential in a sentence, AI has potential to do X, Y, Z, think very carefully. It's meaningless. Doesn't tell us anything at all. Be critical of it. Learning. Now, in the context of AI, we have machine learning. Now, the word learning was appropriated by computer scientists and applied to what the machines were doing. But learning that a machine does is quite different to learning that we as humans do. But the problem is the word learning, machine learning, we think, oh, we assume that the machine is learning the way that humans are learning. We therefore give the machines more credit. We assume they have more capabilities than they actually do have. And that's problematic as well. We cede power to them if we're not careful. Another weasel word is powered. You often hear this. This tool is AI powered. AI doesn't have power, doesn't give power. A battery, electricity is power. So an AI might assist or it might enable, but it doesn't power. It's another weasel word we need to be careful of. Intelligence, spoken about this, you know, it's in the name, artificial intelligence. But no AI tool today is intelligent, and this is how I think of it. So this is the original mechanical Turk. So that's a machine. And it played chess, toured the courts of Europe in the 18th century. And it looked amazing. Everyone was bowled over that this machine could play chess. Extraordinary. It looked amazing. The reality was, inside the box was a human, a little human, a bit like me, who could play chess. So it looked amazing, but the reality was quite different. And we need to always keep that balance in mind. Personalization, I've talked about before. The idea, is it a good thing? We don't know, but in any case, it doesn't work. We're often told that these tools democratize. So because of these tools, we can all be creative for the first time in history. That's obvious nonsense. Actually, it's giving that power to the big corporates over which we have no democratic control. It's transformative. How many times have you heard this? The AI is transformative. But it's not. What it's doing, what it tends to do, is to automate what already exists. A phrase I like to use in education is that automating poor pedagogic practices. So what we do already, it's just making us do it quicker, perhaps. Or more efficient is the word. But is it really transformative? Understanding. I've talked about this, the notion that it understands, because it doesn't really understand, as I've shown with the different pictures. And finally, hallucination. And this one really drives me round the twist, because there are some people I follow on Twitter and the like who are really good and really analytical, etc. And there's been 2 papers published by a professor at Oxford University. And the papers are great, really useful, important papers. But they still use the word hallucination. Hallucination doesn't work in the context of Gen AI. We cannot say the Gen AI system hallucinates, because to hallucinate, it requires a consciousness. Hallucinations come out of a consciousness. These systems do not have consciousness. They cannot hallucinate. So instead of hallucination, we should tell it for what it is. And what it is bullshit. Okay, this is my last topic, very, very brief. I'm just going to tell you in a few moments what I'm doing with the Council of Europe. So I'm a teeny tiny cog in this work, but the Council of Europe represents, it's not the European Union. The Council of Europe is 46 member states across Europe, much bigger than the European Union, almost twice as big in terms of member states. But it's the European organisation that focuses on human rights, democracy and the rule of law. And I'm very proud to have done work with them, in particular this report. So if you're interested, I recommend this. I'm very proud of this one. We look through the different impacts of AI on those things. But as a consequence of this report, the 46 ministers of education last November instructed the Council of Europe to develop a legal instrument to regulate the use of artificial intelligence systems in education to promote and to protect human rights, democracy and the rule of law. So that's the project we're engaged in now. It's a very challenging project, and again, I've only got a tiny role in it, but I think it's so important. Because for me, the 2 things we need to be focusing on is, on one hand, the AI literacy, the other, the legislation. But the other part of this is a recommendation. So this will be recommended to member states, not a law, that teaching and learning about AI, again, incorporates the impact of AI on human rights, democracy and the rule of law. So again, this is AI literacy. But it will become, theoretically, hopefully become a recommendation. So, to finish then, I'm arguing not that AI is always terrible, but most examples of AI today are pretty bad, and we need to engage critically all the time. We need to challenge and better understand what these tools are doing, and we need to make sure that when they're used in education, that they actually do what they say they do and do it properly, and they do it in ways that do respect human and child rights. And the strategies for doing that is conversations like this, but it's also the 2 things that I've mentioned repeatedly. One, in my opinion, is doing what we can as academics in this space to develop a coherent, a comprehensive, critical AI literacy that we help teachers, students, and frankly, everybody across society to really understand what's going on here and not just think this is some cool tool that they can use to save a bit of time, which probably they can't anyway. And the second thing is we need to regulate. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Fane, for this thought-provoking talk and for reminding us our important role in this ecosystem. So, unfortunately, time is always limited, and I'm not sure if AI can give us extra time.
No.
No, really? Okay. But maybe we can ask only one question. Okay, then, please.
So, thank you for your talk. Aren't you forgetting that there is also a good sense in talking about hallucination? There's a lot of papers on it, and a lot of quite good papers on hallucination, and categorizing various ways of talking about hallucination problem. Of course, they assume that it's artificial hallucination. It's not like real, like, that's also why we call it artificial intelligence. It's not real intelligence, it's artificial. And hallucination seems to be a very good way of describing even some of the mistakes, you call them, that AI does, that they are just hallucinations, like the five-legged cat. And I think that I'm coming from the logic perspective, and I can see that teaching logic to students actually is, on one and the same time, shows the strength of the generative AI by its creativeness in using a lot of words and knowing a vocabulary and providing the student a huge vocabulary at one and the same time, but also at the same time, because it's logic, it's very easy for the student when he has actually learned some formalization rules to spot the mistakes and reprompt. I think that's a very good pedagogical situation to be in. What do you think about that?
I respectfully disagree. I disagree because I was interested in some of the words. Use the word know. No AI system knows anything. It doesn't understand. It's not intelligent. It does not hallucinate. The reason I'm objecting to those words is because those words give a set of capabilities to these systems that they do not have, and it's therefore misleading. Now you, as somebody who's engaged with these tools, you get the difference. But most people, they hear it hallucinates, and they therefore assume that it's the same as a human hallucinating. They hear the word artificial intelligence, they assume it's an artificial intelligence. It's not. Right? It's statistical programs, blah, 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 blah. And so that's my concern. So do we need to teach our students the logic? Yes. But I'm simply arguing that we need to leave the weasel words to one side and we need to use real words. So the real truth is they do not hallucinate, they generate nonsense or they generate bullshit. And I'm happy for our students to know that. That's really important. But if we then wrap that up in this anthropomorphic package that suggests that these systems are hallucinating, I think that's a mistake, because they are not. That's what humans do. The machines have no capability whatsoever to hallucinate. So it's a convenient shorthand phrase, but a lot of convenient shorthand phrases then get a life of their own. You remember, you probably know more than many people, when artificial intelligence was first named as artificial intelligence in 1956. Why? It was a marketing ploy, and it was an ambition. One day we will develop an artificial intelligence. The problem is that in the 60 years since, or whatever it is, now people assume that because it's called artificial intelligence, it is artificially intelligent, but it's not. And so we have to break that apart. So I agree with you completely. It's really important to help our students and others to understand the logic, but I believe we need to do it using more accurate words and avoiding unnecessary and misleading anthropomorphisms.